This is an introduction to Starry Landscape Stacker version 1.9. This is the way the application starts up. It shows you an open panel where you can select the files that you're going to process. I like to organize my files so that in each folder I have a set of files that represents a single project. In this case, I have some files I'm using to illustrate this introduction. This can be a collection of light frames, dark frames, they could be raw files, they could be TIFFs. Starry Landscape Stacker version 1.9, unlike earlier versions, it's possible to open raw files. I don't have any for these sample images, so I'm working with the TIFF images. And also, I now recommend to use dark frames. Unfortunately, I don't have any dark frames for these sample images, but you would open them just like any other files, and you just select them. In this case, the easiest thing to do, because I've got a complete set here, I select one and then Command A to get them all. I hit Open. Now it reads all 5 of the images. These images were taken by Adam Woodworth, who has been kind enough to let me use them for instructional purposes. There's a link to Adam's website at the end of this video. Starry Landscape Stacker has finished reading all 5 images and is showing me a quick composition of the images. And what it's done here is it's placed these red dots wherever it thinks there's a star. And in general, this tells you where the sky is, because our first key step here, in fact the only hard step with using Starry Landscape Stacker, is making a mask for the sky. But for this particular image, there's also a reflection here, and it's found some stars in the foreground, so we'll have to deal with those. And I will only be showing you how you deal with the sky in this video, but there's also a video on how to do an image where you have both sky and reflections. So let's talk a bit about the interface before we get into working on the mask. Over here in the left column we have the workflow, and in here are all the operations we'll be going through in making our stacked composite image. Right now we're on the first step, which is editing the dots in the sky. We'll be completing this and moving through the others in a moment. But let's look at the viewing controls. We can zoom in and out on our image, and we can do that with the keyboard with the Z key, and also Command plus, Command minus, Command 0 for zoom to actual pixels, Command 9 to zoom to fit. And right here below the zoom button we have the current zoom factor. We have controls to vary the brightness and contrast of the image. These could be useful if we just want to preview our image and see what it might look like when we've processed it with our favorite image editing software. But these tools can also be useful if you're having difficulty finding the edge between sky and the ground when you're making your mask. So you can play with these to try and improve your ability to see what's sky and what's ground. These controls do not change the image that you're making. These are just controls that help you see what your image looks like. You can double click any slider to return to the default value. Right now we're looking at an overlay that is showing us all these red dots. Later there will also be a mask there. We can hide the overlay if we want to see what's behind it, or show it, and the O key will toggle that as well. We can also vary the opacity of the overlay. And we can change what image we're looking at. Right now we're looking at the quick composite, but we can select any individual image to look at. And we can step through these with the arrow keys on the keyboard or with these previous and next buttons. And typically you will spend most of your time just looking at the quick composite. Okay, so that's our viewing controls. Let's go back to our workflow. And our first key step is always making a mask. The fastest way to make a mask typically is to work with these red dots. You put a red dot where there's sky, and you don't want red dots where there's not sky. So the first step is to get rid of these red dots that are not in the sky. By default we're set up here to paint red dots, so we'll change to erasing red dots. I'm using the G key for ground to do that, and we've got an eraser and we erase those. We could erase red dots up here, and we could S key for paint sky, and we could paint red dots up there. In this particular case, these red dots are very well distributed, and other than that one correction down here, all we have to do is just hit Find Sky, and there we go, an excellent mask. But that isn't always going to be the case. So let's go back and edit the dots in the sky. I'll delete the mask in order to do that, and think about what might happen in some other cases. It's not unusual that there is a need to add some red dots because there are some areas of the sky where there are no visible dots. So we might have a situation where this corner isn't so good, or maybe over here it's not so good, right? In those cases we can S for painting red dots or sky, or using these buttons over here, and we can go across. There's a quick way to go up and down the side here. We just click at one end, shift click at the other, we get a straight row of dots. So we can add dots where we have to. In this case it's working well and it's bridging across this big gap here, but if we were having a problem there, we could stick some red dots in the middle. And we could find sky, and of course it's going to find it and do just fine. Now there's one last case I want to talk about, and that is, let's say we had a cityscape here. We had a cityscape in our foreground, had a bright sky with very few visible stars. In that case, we'd start in a situation where we had lots of red dots down here that we want to paint out, and almost no red dots up here in the sky. And so if we get into that situation, we can just click on this button over here. The default is we're going to start with automatic dots, but we can click on that and start with no dots. So if the dots are of no value at all to you, the default locations, then we change that to no dots, and then we start painting along the horizon. We don't have to get that close. This is close enough. You can see that we can go pretty quickly across here. And now we can shift click for a straight line across, shift click, and we're done. That's all we have to do. We just hit find sky, and there we go, a pretty much perfect mask. I don't think that we can do much better than that. Let me go down here, and let's change this back to the default. I was playing with this earlier. So here's the default configuration when we get here. We have start with mask with islands of sky, and pay attention over here. Let's zoom in on that, right? And I can toggle that to the other case, which is mask without islands of sky. So what's going on here is when it's finding the mask for the sky, it's trying to find areas nearby to the sky that are disconnected. So it's an island of sky, separated by a branch or a narrow passage here between the branches. This can be very useful when you're working with trees, or maybe a bridge in the foreground, which is an open truss structure. So there's lots of gaps that show you the sky. By default, you will be getting mask with islands of sky, and that's very useful. But sometimes it'll jump across and think it's finding some sky, but really what it's found is a dark rock on a cliff face or something, and it's not really sky. So you have to be able to turn this off. That's a pretty rare occurrence. Most of the time you're going to want mask with islands of sky. When you get into working with the mask here, there may be cases where you say, well, that's a pretty good mask, but it's not good enough. And if that happens, say, for example, you come over here and say, well, that's not right. There's an important star right here. If that happens, well, you can just zoom in as much as you want. I'm not very good at painting, so I'll zoom in way in. You can adjust the size of the brush, right? You can use this slider here, but more likely what you're going to do is use the square bracket keys on the keyboard as you're painting, and you can touch it up as much as you want. If something is sticking into the trees, no problem. We can switch to painting ground or erase, and we can expose those trees. In general, it's very bad to have a tree or some other part of the ground painted as sky. It's okay to have this gap. In fact, you want this gap. If you have the mask too close to something on the ground, you're likely to have some shadowing or replication of that thing that's close to the ground in the sky after stacking. That's because this border is never perfect. There's always some bleeding in the original image. There's always some bleeding of the dark into the light, or vice versa. And you can't make a mask that's absolutely perfect to the pixel. You don't want a mask that tight. This is about as tight as you want it to be. Okay, so you can paint it as necessary. Here, there are no stars visible through this tree, so we don't care. The most important thing is anywhere there's a bright star, you want that marked as sky. If it's sky but you can't see any stars, it doesn't matter. And in this case, the easiest thing is just say, oh, well, that's ground, and we're done. Okay, so now we have our mask, we're happy with it, and we can say align in composite. These other two options here, align with, which is optional, and exclude images, which is optional. We'll deal with those in another video. They're quite rarely used. This is the normal sequence for most people. You edit the dots, maybe touch them up a little bit if necessary, possibly touch up the mask a little bit by hand, and then align in Composite, which is finished. So now we're on the save step. Now, the Align in Composite has computed 6 different compositions for you. Here they are. This is all 6 of them, and you get to choose. The default is min horizon noise. And let's see if we can zoom in and find something to illustrate what's going on. Min horizon noise, it's very similar to median, but it's slightly darker. For those with a mathematics or statistics background, it's the 40th percentile, whereas median is the 50th percentile. I think that typically with night sky images, you get a better look with a 40th percentile because the noise tends to bias to the right. Okay, what's this min horizon noise versus the next one here, which is min horizon star duplication? Min horizon noise is trying to minimize the noise at this boundary between the sky and the ground. Here's the mask, I'll turn it back on. So it's trying to minimize the noise at this boundary. Whereas min star duplication is trying to minimize the duplication of stars in that area. And sometimes when you get a bright star right in that area, you get really annoying artifacts where the star gets reproduced several times. So you use min horizon star duplication. The problem with using minimum star duplication all the time is you get a different artifact, and here's an example. And we can change back to min horizon noise. See how that goes away, this squiggly line here. And then star duplication. So each of these two approaches has a strong point and a weak point. Most of the time, the vast majority of the time, the right answer is to use min horizon noise. In the rare case where you see something you don't like with a star being duplicated and it will look like it's go dot, 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 right? Then choose min horizon star duplication. And what you'll do is you'll save min horizon noise, save current image, min horizon star duplication, save current image. And then later you'll take the two images and combine them with an image editing tool like Photoshop, and you'll use one of the images where it looks better and the other where it looks better. And all the differences are going to be in this little narrow band here between the sky and the ground. Okay, the next two choices here are mean with minimum horizon noise and mean with minimum star duplication. So that's mean, the simple average. Sometimes this might be one of these might be the right choice, or you might actually end up combining the two of them. But usually I think that the min horizon noise, the 40th percentile, is going to look better than the mean. And if you have enough images, there's no difference between the median and the mean. So min horizon noise is usually your go-to solution. There's two more here that you might want to look at. There's max, and this takes the greatest value at each pixel location. And so we're getting some star duplication here behind things, but also the image is overall brighter. Here we don't have any examples of airplanes or meteors in the sky, but this max value is what you use to recover meteors, satellites, things like that, and airplanes if you want them moving through the sky. And there's a separate video showing how to do that. The last choice here is minimum value. This is just taking the lowest value at each pixel location. So let's go back up here, and as I was saying, typically you're going to minimum horizon noise is going to be what you want, and you just say save the current image. But for illustration purposes, I'm going to do one more thing here. I'm going to check this box and say also save a copy of the image with the mask. So I'll say save. We're going to save this image. The name is generated from the first file name that we've stacked, and we put on the composition algorithm name here. And then we're going to say save. And now we get to save the first file name, the name of the composition algorithm, -mask. And we're saving the file with the mask in it. And I'll show you how we can use that in a moment. And then I'll turn this off. This is a default that it's off. You don't often have to save the mask. And here, just to illustrate, we can save another. And this is now min horizon star duplication because we're saving a different composition algorithm. And we would do this if we're going to combine those two images in Photoshop later. Okay, so why did we save the mask? Well, let's say that we had to come back later and for some reason process these images again, possibly with a different set of images. Maybe this is a quick test with the first 5, but we really got 30 or 40 that we could work with. There could be several reasons why you could do this. And so what we'll do now is we'll select all these, and we don't want those two because those are results. And we have the mask in our original 5 images, and we can say open. And here we are. We've got our mask that we used before, and we can use it again with essentially no effort. So that's Starry Landscape Stacker version 1.9, and thanks to Adam Woodworth for letting me use his images to illustrate Starry Landscape Stacker for you. There's a link to his website here. He runs some workshops and has some great courses on night photography.